I'd submit to you that most of the research says that you make a certain amount of money, you're going to be sort of like a happiness terminal velocity where once you hit that, you're not really going to be much happier by making more money. And certainly you might be trading something for it. So there's always that consideration. But the other two reasons we work are that we want to find engagement. We want it to be kind of enjoyable and fun. If 10 hours a day are like pure hell every week, that's not going to be a very good life, and like the reason you want the money in the first place is to have a better life for you and your family. So if you're mortgaging your happiness, 50 hours a week for that, that's probably not a good bargain. So we want to be engaged and have fun. We want to make money, and we want to find meaning. Those are really the only three reasons to do it.
Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of Digital Domination for Lawyers podcast. My name is Andy Mizrahi, and I'm so excited to have my very special guest, Dave Maxfield, consumer protection law lawyer. Dave is based out of South Carolina. He is a protection attorney, a consumer protection attorney who represents clients against banks, debt collectors, credit bureaus, vehicle dealers. Today, we're going to be talking about viewing law as a system, AI, health and mindset, and its impact on performance for attorneys. Dave, hi, how are you?
Andy, how are you? Thank you for having me. Yeah, good to be on. And we had a good conversation ahead of time about AI and how it helped you fix your thermostat, it sounds like. So I'm interested to hear that story too.
Yeah, it totally did. Took a picture of the thermostat. It said what year it was, and it said, these are all the things you could do with it. I was like, oh, it's amazing.
It is. Yeah, it's an incredible, and I don't mean to skip ahead, but so, I graduated law school in 94, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had computers in the beginning, we had computers with black screens with, green letters on them. Like if you ever go back and watch War Games when Matthew Broderick's 11, and they, he has this computer. And anyway, I won't spoil the plot for those of you who haven't seen it.
See it, but I know
you should go back. You were 1 year old, so don't worry, but go back and check it, Andy, when you get a chance. It's a pretty good movie. But then one day, when I was at 2L, we got computers with color screens, and we thought, wow, this is amazing. What can we do with this technology? And it turns out we learned how to play Doom and Duke Nukem, in color. That's really all we did with it. But it was really worthwhile. And changed from when I got out, when there were fax machines were kind of new, to the point where email began to dominate our lives, to the point where cell phones were with us all the time, to the point where we have, where we are right now with AI. It's like being born when there's covered wagons and now there's airplanes for me. So,
Wow.
It's an amazing time to have been around to practice law.
Wow.
And to do that, what seems like a long time now, but still seems like just yesterday.
Wow. It's amazing. You really saw 4 major technology revolutions in your career.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think there'll be more too. I think the AI is going to blow the doors off all the rest of it, and I'm going to be a fan of it right up until it uses me for fuel, probably. But
until the robots take over.
Until they take over. Yeah.
So Dave, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell us your journey, what kind of lawyer you are, how'd you get to this point, all that good stuff.
Okay, well, good. Well, so again, I'm Dave Maxfield, and I practice in consumer law area, and I'll talk about what that means a little bit in South Carolina.
Uh-huh.
And the way I got into it in the beginning was sort of two things. One is I joined a sort of a traditional small firm out of law school, and what that means is you get sent to places like family court. And after a few years of going to family, have you ever been to family court, Andy?
I've been to a lot of parking tickets back.
I'm not asking you as a litigant.
No,
family court.
I know in my early 20s, I had so many speeding tickets. Now I drive like a grandma, but back then I knew every courthouse in my counties.
Okay, well that's good. That's good and bad. But family court in South Carolina is domestic relations stuff. What do they call it in New Jersey? What do they call when you're getting a divorce? Where do you go?
Civil court?
Civil court. Okay. So do you have divorces with jury trials and stuff in New Jersey?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank heavens for that. We don't either. We have just, a judge decides those cases, but you get sent to family court to divorce people or, with people fighting about kids and stuff like that. And they, somebody calls you on, Easter, I was supposed to have them at 11 and it's 11:02, that kind of thing. And after a couple of years of that, I thought I got to find something else to do besides that. And, personal injury, which the firm, a lot of friends do that. you know, interesting to me, and I did some of that, but I was never, for me, like I could never get real fired up about like that, because I'm like, yeah, somebody runs a red light, and unless they're drunk or something, it's most likely not what they meant to do. But man, like when Wells Fargo runs over you, they got their foot nailed to the accelerator and they know exactly what they're doing.
Oh,
So, it's always been for me like sort of a big versus little thing. And, the way that people get taken advantage of by, both businesses that, you maybe shouldn't trust, and the ones that tell you to trust you all the time and are some of the biggest corporations in America. Like that's what sort of has driven me, because that's always intentional. Like that's somebody meaning to take advantage of somebody else. And that's kind of like trying to level that playing field, as little bit as one guy can do. That's what drives me. And so I got into that as a means of, sort of following my passion, which everybody tells you to do. And also as a way to get out of going to family court and, having somebody fight over like who gets the champagne glasses and who gets the rowboat, for the 25th, 100th time. So that's why I do what I do now, and have been very lucky to have, the career I have that lets me do it and really focus on that.
that's so interesting. Yeah, it's amazing how many industries, large corporations, I'm starting to notice it now, like even just with the internet, the fact that we are so glued to our phones and we're so addicted to TikTok, like Mark Zuckerberg, cut it out. You have all the power. Give us a break.
If you're listening, Mark Zuckerberg, enough. This is your last warning, Zuckerberg. Andy and I are coming for you. Seriously, I hope. Can we edit that out? I wish I hadn't said that. I don't know what he's going to do if he ever, who knows? Who knows what he's capable of? Yeah, I mean, things that are, to think that we've come up from a world where it's like, Pepsi advertises on TV by saying, we're better than Coke. And look, everybody loves Pepsi. And like, watch this TV ad. Here's our Super Bowl ad, to the point where like you're algorithmically being targeted for certain things, advertising wise, on your TV, on your phones, pretty much everywhere. The fact that, I don't know if you remember, maybe it was Blade Runner. I'm also dating myself, but that's like the old guy movie to trot out. But I believe that's the one. It might be Blade Runner, the old Harrison Ford movie. And I think it's that. Yeah, he's walking down the street, and like the advertising at that point is almost like surrounds you. Like it almost like, and maybe it's a different movie, but it kind of goes around you like a swarm of bees that's targeted to things that like thinks, at least at the time, I don't know if they even thought about like algorithmic targeting, where it's like, oh, this person thought about buying a Ford F-150, a year ago. Let's keep hitting him with Ford F-150 ads, but like it's actually sort of swarming around you all the time. We're kind of swimming in it. And that's insane. I mean, that's really 25 years ago. It wasn't like that. And just the fact that, those things could be weaponized, politically too, to be like, oh, this person sort of thinks this way. Let's triple down on that and make them really think that way, and things like that. It's an insane world right now.
Yeah. And the fact that even like you could just be talking up to your friend about it, or you Google something and then they pick it up and they, ads. It's crazy how they do that.
There was something like we had my parents come visit a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about something. We're sitting outside. Nobody's looking at their phones. We're out in the patio. We're talking about something, and somebody said, oh yeah, we should think about getting like an umbrella or something. I don't know what it is, because it's like sunny. It's South Carolina. And, man, my wife's phone for like the next 4 days had like umbrella ad, it's just like for like these big, outdoor umbrellas. And it was, I don't even know if the phone was outside. It was insane. Yeah. But we'll probably buy an umbrella. So
yeah,
I guess it worked.
I guess it worked.
Anyway. Yeah.
So you're big on the big versus little, taking on these big corporations that, run us over intentionally. That's what, you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
yeah, definitely. I mean, it just seems like, I don't know what always one person can do, but, at present, in some respects, the justice system we have is what that's for, is to address there's no other place really to address it. And of course, people increasingly get, all these things I agree to these terms, we're going into arbitration, and it's almost unavoidable lots of times. A lot of things are There's arbitration clauses that aren't really, maybe they never were fair, but the kinds of arbitrations is the needle's getting pushed to where they're less and less fair, I think. So anyways, we could talk about that, but there's many soapboxes to jump one to the other.
Yeah. But
yeah, it's like CrossFit.
You're a very techie kind of person, I see. You understand AI, you understand internet, you understand a lot of these things. One of the things that you're very passionate about is viewing law as a system. Law firms, what does that mean?
Well, every business really kind of runs the same way if you think about it. We take some kind of a raw material, we process it somehow, we turn it into some kind of a product which we sell, and that's where the money comes from, right? And so lawyers, if we have, we wrote my friend Larry Port and Larry founded Rocket Matter. We wrote a book called The Lean Law Firm, which you have very graciously put the caption in my caption here, author of The Lean Law Firm. That's true. And what that book was about was, sort of its central premise was like, look, we're not different than a bike factory, right? A bike factory takes steel and titanium and they forge it into components and they assemble the components and they build a bicycle and they sell the bicycle. Maybe it's high end, they sell it for a lot, or maybe they make a lot of them and sell them for a little, but they are in the business of making bicycles and that's how they make money. And we are sort of the same. We think like we're really different, lawyers do, but we run business. Our business is just like everybody else's, where we take some raw material, put it through a process, and that's where the money comes from. Our raw material is like people with problems, like a specific kind of problem, a legal need, or a company with a legal need. And, our process can be litigation, it could be transactional, and, that's how we get paid. Maybe we get paid kind of the old lawyer way of like by the hour. And in the book, we talk about this a lot. It's kind of a limiting factor because you only got so many hours. So you're always going to be capped off either by what the market will allow you to be paid or how much you're willing to trade of your life to get paid. But, in the rest of the business world, they generally don't bill things that way. And so like, I'm a big fan of like contingent and flat fees and stuff. I work almost really exclusively that way because if I can create improvements in it, I'm always going to be the beneficiary of those. So I can make more money that way by doing things for the same money in less time.
I love that. Like, you just made it like, it's so simple because at the end, it's complicated, but you just simplified it and said all businesses, they run the same. We're not different than a bike factory. We take raw material and put it through the process and we just solve it, right? Basically, did I say it incorrectly?
Yeah, basically that's it. No, you got it right. And the thing that got me into all of that was like early in my career, somewhat after like finally escaping family court, like I started to think about like, well, if I want to make more money in this, I was an hourly biller like some people, how would I do that? I could work more, but I don't really want to do that. And I don't feel like I can go up on my rate very much. So what do I do? And I looked at I kind of looked like for like in traditional law firm management books, how do you succeed as a lawyer? Because, I'm in a small practice and eventually in a solo practice. And how do you do that? And all the books that I found were like, seemed like they were written in like 1955. They were all like, oh, well, your day should look like this. You wake up in the morning, you roll into the office at 9, you read the advance sheets, you dictate some things, you make some calls, you go to lunch for 2 hours, you come back, maybe you meet a few people and you go home. And I'm like, that's like a 1950s sitcom, that's like where the guy's a lawyer. That's not my reality. My reality is like, I'm trying to, eat a Hot Pocket while I'm looking on my phone at what, Kim and Kanye are fighting about today. And so I was like, I gotta figure out a different way. So I started reading things that were really geared towards manufacturing. I don't know if people who've been
what?
Because, well, here's why. Because if we kind of accept that we're a business like any other running a system that's kind of a linear system, you prospect for raw material, you get your clients, you put them through some sort of a process. Their process is, I got a problem. Your product is you solve that problem. You get paid that way. Then you start to realize it's just like, I'm just doing what Henry Ford was doing, where he's like taking metal and rubber and making a car out of it and selling the car. So if I can like kind of take stuff and, for lack of a better word, steal it from manufacturing science, who's been at this problem for 120 years, maybe that's what I should look at. And so I started looking at things like the Toyota production system. There's a book by a guy named Eliyahu Goldratt, who's an Israeli physicist, but it's a super accessible book called The Goal that if you ever go into business school, they make you read most of the time. And so from reading that, and he talks about something called a theory of constraints, which is basically like your process is only as fast and as good as like your slowest, weakest part of that process. So that's what you should improve. I started looking at things that way and from a systems perspective, and then started like, well, I just need to improve, figure out what my system looks like, map it out, figure out what the slowest part is, work on that. When that gets improved, a new slowest part will arrive. Then I'm going to work on that and fix that until you have a really efficiently running system, which is always, you're always able to improve it a little bit more, so over time it gets very good. And so that's how I run things, is kind of from that standpoint, almost like a lean manufacturing standpoint. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's brilliant.
That's what the lean law firm's about. It just makes it really easy for lawyers to learn how to do that.
What's the...
Well, it's just called the lean law firm.
No. Eliyahu.
Oh yeah. That's called The Goal. The Goal.
From 1984.
Yeah. And he wrote a bunch of books. Yeah. It's an old book. It's one of these books that, and our book is this way too. It's like a story. It has like a story with characters and somebody who's trying to solve a problem. And in Goldratt's book, it's this guy who's like got to save this factory. And this factory's like about, we're going to come shut you down. And basically like corporate's telling him that. And, this kid the guy who runs the factory and has kind of been put in charge of trying to save it is from this little town. And if the factory goes, the town's doomed. So he's got kind of this, it's this Joseph Campbell hero's journey kind of a thing. So he's got to save the factory, and he has this mentor figure that kind of is like, well, you need to, find the slowest part and fix this. And he teaches him these principles that allows him to save the factory.
Wow.
And so it's a great story. And our book is kind of the same way. It's, a lawyer gets downsized out of a big firm, goes to a small firm, great lawyer, bad businessman who runs it, kind of a local legend. And he's got to kind of figure out how to save this firm. And that's what he does. And the cool thing is the ABA let us do it as a graphic novel in part. So it's got all these comic book panels in it and things like that, which is kind of different. So that's cool.
I love it. Love that. Wow.
Yeah.
I got to check it out. So yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, you're blowing my mind with all your insights and intakes. No, really, I'm just like taking it all in.
So I'm just throwing up like 20 years of like stuff on you, but that's okay.
I love it.
It's
it's so amazing, brilliant. Okay. Back.
Well, one thing I'll tell you that's sort of a funny story about that is when the ABA, you're trying to get the ABA to like, let us write a comic book, and they're like, oh, really? And okay. So you got to get an artist to do that. And the art, we had like different submissions from people to kind of do the artwork. And we got a lot of these sort of classic, comic book things. And the best one was this guy submitted like this picture of some work that he had done before. And we're like, draw a picture of a lawyer like talking to his wife, is what we said. And the picture that he sent us was this guy who was just absolutely jacked. I mean, he was just like superhero ripped, not like any lawyers we know. And the wife that he's talking to is in bed with another guy. We're like, that's too spicy for the ABA. I don't think we can use that. But you need to take about 150 pounds off this guy and make, So we still ended up with a fit looking lawyer and a nice wife who, as far as we know, wasn't having an affair with some other lawyer. But it's got some entertaining comic book panels in it, and the guy did a really good job for us.
Wow!
Yeah,
that's awesome. I got to check this out. This is brilliant. Wow! And I was going to get the audio book. I was like, let me get the audible book.
Get the audio book, Andy. Let me tell you why. And so you can get all this stuff on Amazon.
Yeah.
But the audio book, the guy that did the audio book, we had a voice artist do it, and he's great. And it's really, you just listen to it in the car or whatever. And, if you're going to get, what I would do is, buy the 85, whatever dollar not hardback, paperback if you want, because that's what law books cost, right? But, my students are always, I assign the book for one of my classes in true professor form,
Wait, quickly. Tell our listeners, where do you teach?
Okay. I teach just as an adjunct professor, so, fake professor, but, I still get to do it at the University of South Carolina Rice School of Law in Columbia, South Carolina, which is the big law school in our state.
Nice.
And for a long time, we only had one law school in the state, so we could also say we were the best.
Wow.
And I still think we are. People could debate that now. But yeah, I get to teach that. And so the students are always relieved when you assign them a book that only costs them like $80 to buy instead of like $240 to buy.
I was looking at this book. I'm like $80. I'm like, that's a. But you're like,
get it on Kindle. Get it on Kindle. It's like 15. But if you get the Kindle combination with the Audible book with and where it'll sync between the two, and that's great because the Kindle's just as good as the paperback. I read almost everything on Kindle, and it's way cheaper. And the Audible's great. The guy did a great job with it.
Check it out.
Super entertaining.
Awesome. That's
good.
Amazing. Now, so I love everything you said, how to succeed and run your business as a factory. Brilliant, applicable to all businesses and applicable to all law firms. It's like, keep it simple. Just a factory, just solve these problems.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk to you about, so now I know you're super techie. AI, blowing up. Tell me about AI. What are your thoughts about this?
I'm in love with it. I mean, we haven't had like one of those relationships like in that Jude Law movie or whatever, but I mean, it's close. I am a huge fan and there's a lawyer up from New Jersey named John Lamuro. Do you know John, or do you know his really, really good lawyer, really good PI lawyer, very, very deep into AI. And my favorite AI product is a product called Anytime AI, which is for lawyers who are really plaintiffs lawyers and kind of PI lawyers, but doesn't have to be. I use it a lot and I'm not a PI lawyer, but it is a fantastic, specific built platform for lawyers. And John right there in New Jersey is a big part of that. But that is my very favorite app right now for that. And then on the sort of the free, what does
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you how I use it. I dump consumer law is very document intensive. Like there's credit reports, there's bank statements, there's contracts, there's things like that. So I dump all my documents in there, what I get from the other side, what I have from my client, and it allows me to have it as a repository. That's like, I have all my documents in there, just like any kind of document repository. And then of course it'll OCR all those documents. No great shakes there. Lots of things will do that. But I can then create sort of what I would call a task. Like I want to learn about, like, let's just say I want to kind of learn what this case is really about so I can start to put together a complaint. Mm-hmm. I could create a task, throw the relevant documents into that task, and just start asking it questions, just like you would ChatGPT. It's good. Of course, it's all, you're in a closed database. So nothing that you're doing, importantly is being shared with the outside world. It's going to confine most of its responses to those documents. So you're not going to get weird outside stuff. And it's going to give you very specific answers to your questions and can give you very general, answers too. Like, what do you think a good theme for this case is, or something like that as you go. Like you can really start to build out.
But it's better it's better than ChatGPT because it's very lawyer specific. Like ChatGPT is too general.
Like it has like the things that it you can do with it. Like you can tell it to draft a complaint. You can tell it to answer discovery. You can tell it to do things. It's got very purpose-built things. For lawyers that do PI, it does medical chronologies. And it also drafts demand letters. Wow. So if you're a PI lawyer, it is absolute no-brainer. If you are another kind of a sort of plaintiff side lawyer, it's also very good. But like I use it for all kinds of things. But you can, the things it can create for you are amazing. And really, to me, the most amazing part of AI is not that it can like search a document and answer specific questions, but that it can like tell you very human things that you didn't realize, sometimes about the case. Like I'm very big into like this case has to have like a storyline that people can understand. Like, and my storyline is always kind of like, because it's a consumer law, here's this company that promises to do these things, right? They tell all these people, we're the best, trust us, blah, blah, blah. They make some kind of a promise. And then one day somebody believing that comes in and does business with them. And then they go back, and so things don't go as they're supposed to. And normally the reason to that is because there's some intentional bad act. They made this promise, this person relied on it to their detriment normally. And then when push comes to shove, like all of that's meaningless. That promise goes out to the window. The trust us part turns out you can't trust them. And everything they say, that's almost always like a betrayal story of some kind. And usually because of that, somebody gets hurt. And then usually the reason for that is like, if you look at the motive, it's usually greed. It's like, we want to make money off this person. So this is why we did things this way at the end of the day. They'll never say that, but you're always trying to get to that. So I have kind of this 5 or 6 part sort of narrative, and I can sort of extract that from a lot of data to build a narrative like really early on in the case, which is, really important because it kind of gets us down to something. I have a lawyer friend. I'm in a group called Hostage to Hero, which is a great group run by a brilliant woman named Sari Delamotte out of Portland, Oregon. It's kind of a trial lawyers working group. I'm in a working group for trial lawyers run by a woman named Sari Delamotte, who wrote a book called Hostage to Hero, which is on Trial Guides. You can get it, probably Amazon too. But she has a group called the H2H Crew, and it's fantastic for if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, especially PI. And so I'm a member of that. And one of the lawyers, a great lawyer named Jody Moore, who teaches in that group, talks about sort of an XY. The cases kind of have like an X and a Y. Like X, plaintiff wins. You could, if the jury believes X, plaintiff wins. If the jury believes Y, defendant wins. Right. So you're always looking for that X. And I'm always looking for sort of a story that supports it. That's very clear. Because that's how people think. They think in stories. They don't think in evidence like we do. So I want to kind of convert the evidence into a really compelling storyline. And AI is surprisingly good at sort of extracting that and helping me kind of working with it as a partner, kind of put that story together. And kind of once you have that story together, it sort of informs your discovery and everything else you do. So I use it in kind of an unorthodox way like that to sort of pull the story out. And then once I've got the pieces of the story, then I can look for the evidence to support it. And that's kind of my working process.
Interesting. Well, I love that you keep saying the key thing is story, because in law, I feel like there's probably, there's a lot of like technical information that is being shared to all the parties. And one framing device that makes things simple is storytelling, which I understand that you seem to be a very big believer in storytelling. And, the book that you mentioned, what's his name? Eliyahu M. Goldrat's book, and your own book, and just the way you work is all through storytelling, right? It's a good
That's
technique.
I think that in almost any profession that's almost all we do. Humans just don't learn other ways. Now you learn math and you have a way of learning that, and it's by repetition and by understanding. But generally, like almost any sort of information, like that's what we've been wired for, however long we've been on this earth to like understand things in that way. And if you don't give somebody a story, they'll create one in their own head to explain what happened. And so, we just are very flawed in that. That's how we learn things, or for good or bad. I don't know if that's a flaw. And we have all these kind of cognitive biases and things that we're susceptible to as well. But, in the old days, I think maybe people are realizing this now. If you're trying to convince somebody of something, or convince it, to just say it's a jury, we'll pretend we don't get put in arbitration all the time and we're going to a jury. You just throw a bunch of data up in front of them. They can't make anything out of that. So they're going to make a story out of that. If you just throw up well, here's some facts, right? Without like a narrative to bind it, they'll just make a story out of that too.
Yeah. And
if you, so that's just how people learn things. And so you have to kind of put it in what you might as well, since they have a square shaped hole in their head, you got to make it a square, to put in there. And because there's no way they're just going to make one anyway. And so you want it to be as much as you can, the version that you want, to be the, which hopefully the truth, but you want them to accept. And I don't think it's manipulative, but I just think it's acknowledging how humans really learn things.
Yeah.
So I kind of talked off topic. It really, really is. I think what I was going to say is like in law school, you're kind of taught maybe on this sort of Greek model of like, well, you make a rational argument. And if your argument is logically coherent, then that is the better argument. And if we were all computers, I think that would be true. But, even judges are human beings, right? And so that's not how they process things. Though if we look at politics and things like that, what works? Good story, simplicity, repetition, three best things that you could say it said over and over and over again, the same way, different ways, every way, because that's sort of how people are more influenced. If there's anything that the last 30 years in America has taught us is like, people aren't rational actors. It's not, give them the facts and they'll, and the logic, and they'll do, certain things. It's just like, and I think both sides politically, you can see how much it's evolved if you go back and look at an old debate from, like 30 years ago, where it's very almost like classic debating, it's polite and all that stuff. And it's regrettable in a lot of ways that we've lost that, but it's just people getting asked a question that they don't answer, and they just go back to like 4 talking points over and over and over again. And, the terrifying and true part of that is like, well, that works. And that's how people decide things. They get 3 or 4 things in their head. There's a great trial lawyer named Mark Mandel, who I think is also up from your neck of the woods, who, is big into something called case framing. And what he says is like, people pick out like 3 or 4 issues in a case that they just can't get over. Like if you go back and talk to a jury after it's over, they'll go, I just can't get over the fact that so-and-so did something. And they'll seize on 3 or 4 things. And those will be the things that really drive the whole case. So, acknowledging the reality of the situation, I think we have to persuade like humans in caves, 10,000 years ago did, which is with storytelling.
Wow. Love that. That's so amazing. That's a great like topic and a great way to go about, I guess, all business and lawyer business, and just storytelling is your friend with all lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then the interesting thing is that, because AI, and the other tool I use that I really like is Perplexity, which is, a more of a, like a sort of chat GPT-ish, but it's very user friendly. I just prefer it. And it's just a really good app. And you can also like, close it off. So it, you can make sort of a contained chat so that other people can't see it. But how good because it's like read so much of the internet, quote, and because that was put out there by humans, at least initially, the content that's out there, it can sort of act like a human sometimes. And that's what is so interesting about AI. And so that means like when you do try to work on a story and it starts to sort of source things from the collective human psyche, even though it's a machine, it's kind of helping you humanize a story, which I think is like fascinating. That's how I use it anyway. And
Wow.
I just think that's amazing that that's what it can do, and
So
it's a crazy world.
here's my question.
Yeah.
At what, because you've been doing this for a long time. So, and I think you've touched on this with your book and you had a podcast, but what was the biggest obstacle you faced in getting your brand out there, and how were you able to overcome it? I know we kind of touched on it, but I'd love to hear what you.
Like in terms of like the lean law firm, or
Yeah, just getting your business out there, getting more clients and all that stuff.
okay. Yeah. Well, let me talk about the lead. I've done a good job with my practice, and the way that I've done a good job with my practice is, I would say 2 things. One is that, I'm in a smallish market, South Carolina, and there are not many people who do what I do. The good thing about the kind of law I practice, the good and the bad thing. The bad thing is it's like technical and complicated and nerdy. The good thing is that means that like not that many people really want to learn about it. So if you, sort of pay the upfront price and learn that, then you're one of the few games in town, for that. And so I benefit from having done it a long time and having, good results over a long time. And so you get kind of like, oh, I don't know who does this except this guy. Go to see this guy. I got a lot of other lawyers send people to me because they don't know anybody who does what I do except me. So that's good. And I always tell my students, when it comes to like marketing, like a niche, or a niche, if you want to say it correctly, is like, and unless you're in a very small market, like, if you want to be like, I'm the lawyer that does dog bites and car wrecks and DUIs and truck wrecks and divorces, that's a recipe for starvation in a big market, because you're competing against every other specialist and every other generalist. But if you can find something you really like and really focus on that and be that guy or that girl that does that and is known for doing that, the business kind of finds you. And so I'm not a great marketer, but I'm good at developing the niche that I'm in, and pretty good at doing it. And I've been doing it a long time. So that's good. But in terms of like a true marketer, I'm not good at that, probably. the other thing I was going to say is that I read something, though, like 25 years ago that says, nobody starts out as an expert. Like all experts are self-created. And I'm like, what does that mean? And it really means like, if you're interested in something, go out there and start talking to other lawyers about that, do CLEs, do whatever, just find a place to speak and keep speaking on that. And pretty soon everybody thinks you're the expert on that. That's how that expertise gets created. And if you're developing a niche and you do that, like that will eventually work. I think that's in a book called Rainmaking by a guy named Ford Harding that I read that all those years ago. And I still remember that. And that has proven to be really true. So that's good. And does that answer your question, Andy?
Very much.
Kinda?
Very, very much.
Okay.
So
yeah.
How can, as we get into wrap up mode, how can listeners find out more about you?
On my website for my firm, it's consumerlawsc.com. And then if they want to find out about like the Lean Law Firm book or something like that, or just sort of those concepts, you could Google that. I think we have the website is either leanlawfirmbook.net. There, I think, is a website that is leanlawteam.com that you can go to. And trying to think what else, getting the book. Here's where I'm a terrible marketer. I have not marketed that very much. Like we wrote it, we did it, we had the podcast, but I just like trying to like make that a separate sort of part of business. Like I've failed miserably at it. I haven't really done a good job with that, but I'm very interested and passionate about it. And so I love talking to people about it. And sometimes I help firms sort of set up those systems. Sometimes law firms that are like, we're struggling and we don't kind of know what to do. I will do some consulting for them to kind of help them with that.
Cool.
So that's fun. I love doing that. Actually, that's super fun.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. Anything?
Thanks.
New ventures coming up in the future? You're like excited? Another book, another podcast.
Another book there. Well, I do have. This is so off topic. I wrote another book. We talked a little bit about mindset and performance and things like that. And I wrote a book called Up Your HRV. Which let me see your watch. Do you have a watch on?
Not on me, but I usually have like a...
What do you got on your wrist? Do you have something on your wrist?
I usually have a Casio lately. I'm trying to be low tech.
A Casio, man, that's old school.
I'm trying to be analog, as Wow,
that's awesome, man. Yeah. That's good. An old Casio G-Shock is a great,
just
indestructible watch.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a classic.
A little more tech-free these days.
I think that's wonderful, but I'll tell you what a lot of people do. Like I have, this watch is like what is this? This is a Garmin, right? So this thing tracks all kinds of metrics. And of course, being techie and nerdy, it's sort of mandatory that I do that, in terms of myself and also, my law practice and otherwise. But I got and this is an Aura ring. I don't know if people use these sometimes. I
know that. Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So I got this Aura ring, which you can see maybe has got, like digital stuff in there that's reading things.
Cool.
Very, really cool. And I have also worn a Whoop, if people have seen those. And of course, Apple Watches will also measure things like HRV, which is heart rate variability, which is kind of a measure of your resilience. Like what condition are you in? How able are you to handle stress and things like that? And so sort of my other area of interest has been sort of like, look, at the end of the day, the most important machine in a law firm is the lawyer. And so that machine has to be, in good condition to perform well and, both physically and mentally. And so the book I wrote was called Up Your HRV, which is kind of like heart rate variability, again, being sort of a key metric. It's like, if that is a key metric to like your health and resilience, like how do you improve that? Like, what can you do? It's kind of like a missing manual for Aura and Whoop users and Apple Watch users to be able to like, what are the things that I can do that will actually improve my HRV? And if I improve my HRV, I'll be healthier. So I have one thing to sort of focus on. And so that book is a short book, maybe 150 pages that like talks about how to do that. That's on Amazon too, called Up Your HRV.
What is HRV? I'm sorry for our...
Sure. Okay. So we're going to get nerdy for a minute. Heart rate variable. So you get your heartbeat, right?
Yes.
Nice and slow, steady, steady-ish, you hope. And you can look on your watch and be like, okay, my heart rate is 60, right? And whatever it is. Okay. That's good. You want a nice low heartbeat. You want a good low resting heart rate. That's kind of a measure of, when you sleep overnight, one of the things these devices measure is like, what's your resting heart rate overnight? Generally, the lower, the better. Okay. And so, that's a good measure of your health. But there's also another measure that's called heart rate variability, which is the time between heartbeats. Okay. And we think we want that to be like really steady and regular, not much variation, but really most of the science, all the science really points to you want there to be a variation in the time between heartbeats, because the more there is, that's the better condition your autonomic nervous system, which is sort of your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, your flight fight response, that stress response, and which is the sympathetic nervous system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is like how fast can it calm down, right?
Wow.
If a Bengal tiger is chasing me and I'm like, well, Bengal tiger's chasing me, and I get really excited, I'm going to have a dump of adrenaline, epinephrine. I'm going to, all kinds of things are going to happen in my heart. My blood vessels are going to change. My heart rate's going to come up. My eyes are going to dilate. All these things to deal with, like stress, which in the old world was great, because we didn't get eaten by as many tigers as we would have otherwise. In the modern world, when it's like, this bastard just emailed me and said this, and you have that same response, maybe not so good, especially if it becomes chronic. So one of the ways that we can see how we're dealing with stress is by improving sort of that variability, because the other side of the stress coin is you want that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in and calm down that stress as fast as you can, especially stress that's like sort of in your head, kind like lawyers deal with. So I started to I was trying to figure out like, well, my HRV is not that good. I'm in pretty good shape, but I'd like to improve it. How do I do it? Couldn't really find a book for it. So I sort of wrote one. I just wrote one.
Wow.
And researched it. I mean, that sounds like super impressive, but I mean, it's very much like armchair scientist finding good research and trying to put it together, which at the end of the day, lawyers is like, we get a bunch of information and we present it in some way, which is what I tried to do there. And in like a really accessible way. And it tells you the things that, foods that are helpful, types of exercise that are more helpful than others, things like that to sort of improve that. And it works. So, I try to, I tell my students this, maybe this is a good place. I'm not sure where we are time-wise, but to wind up, but there's like really only 3 reasons to work at all, right? But what's one reason we work, Andy?
Make money.
Right, money. That's one of them, right? We got to make enough money. We have certain goals financially that we want to meet. You're going to, I'd submit to you that most of the research says that you make a certain amount of money, you're going to be sort of like a happiness terminal velocity, where once you hit that, you're not really going to be much happier by making more money. And certainly you might be trading something for it. So there's always that consideration. But the other 2 reasons we work are that we want to find engagement. We want it to be kind of enjoyable and fun. Yeah. If 10 hours a day are like pure hell every week, that's not going to be a very good life, and like the reason you want the money in the first place is to have a better life for you and your family. So if you're mortgaging your happiness, 50 hours a week for that, that's probably not a good bargain. So we want to be engaged and have fun. We want to make money, and we want to find meaning. Those are really the only 3 reasons to do it. And so kind of getting into that middle one where, we're trying to be engaged and have fun and stuff like that. Part of that that makes it unfun is like the stress part of that, right? Like if things feel very stressful, if things feel like, oh, there's 100 people with daggers just waiting to put it in me out there, which lawyers, sometimes you feel like everybody's got out to get you, but, because our profession is so different that at least if you're in litigation, your job is to engage in conflict like every day. Your job is if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, your job is to start fights with people. I mean, that's crazy, but that's kind of what we do in hopefully a very civil way. But that can be very stressful. And so I wanted a way to sort of manage that so that I could be as effective as I can be, because if I'm the most important machine in my system, that machine's got to have a lot of WD-40 on the joints to be, and in the head to be working at optimal speed and capacity. So that's why I did that.
Love that. Brilliant. Applies to everything, sports and work.
Oh, yeah.
And more. That's probably the reasons why the best athletes perform the best, that they can calm themselves down in these stressful situations and finish games and stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, you look at LeBron and the chalk and the rituals and things like that. Those are all things really designed to put them into a certain zone that. And this is the last little bit of nerdy research. I was reading a book last night that they were talking about. They had done research. You know how people will, like, for certain things will get super psyched up, like sports. Do you play a sport? You look like
basketball.
You play a sport.
I'm a basketball guy.
Basketball. Okay, basketball. I'm a soccer guy. I'm way too short for basketball.
Me too.
But yeah, well, if you can shoot, it doesn't matter. We know that. But I mean, basketball is a great example because, I mean, think how people get hot, right? Think how people sometimes the game seems slow and easy and effortless. And how you get in like that sometimes. And sometimes it seems like you can't hit a shot to save your life, right?
Yeah.
Same Andy. Why is that? Right? Shouldn't it be the same every time? And one of the things I read last night that was interesting is for certain sports, like that psych up, like being in a really aroused emotional state is really helpful. Like if you're going to try to set the world deadlift record, you want to be listening to Slayer, on your headphones, and you want to be you want people to slap your face. You see people do that, and be just I'm in blind rage mode, and that could be helpful for that. For almost every other sport, in fact, I think what I read was for every physical effort lasting longer than 10 or 30 seconds, that's terrible. You go in much better relaxed. If you start a basketball game in a good headspace and relaxed, you're much more likely to play well than if you are all, up with the hype music and everything like that. So you see people do those rituals that they do, and that is to kick in their parasympathetic nervous system, even if they don't know that's what they're doing. LeBron probably does. He's brilliant. But to calm themselves down and to get themselves back into a frame where they've performed well in the past. So that stuff is that human intersection of why do we do really well sometimes? And why do we do really bad other times? And even if we're lawyers, why is it so easy to talk sometimes? Other times it's just you can't get the right words out. I don't know. Yeah. So if there's a way we can sort of duplicate the successful things, that's real important for what we do.
Wow. Love that. Dave, I could talk to you all day. We have a lot,
I could talk all day. So I'll shut up now, though.
No. It's great. So as we wrap up, one more time, how can our listeners find you? What's your website again?
Sure. It's consumerlawsc, like southcarolina.com. Also, it's leanlawteam.com would work. Email is Dave, D-A-V-E, at consumerlawsc.com. So if anybody had any questions about anything, fine to email me. Happy to answer you.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much for jumping on with me. This has been another episode of Digital Domination for Lawyers podcast. And
another successful episode of Digital Domination for Lawyers.
I hope to catch you soon.
Great. Thank you, Andy.